they don't, they don't have time to watch the live stream, but they can, yeah, they can go back and see. So we are live streaming now, and we're recording. So welcome everybody who's part of today's seminar, and welcome to everyone who's watching the recording. This is our final 2022 STIR seminar in the series. So we've had 11, and today we're doing our 12th one. And just to remind you, our partners are Maastricht University. So welcome everybody who's part East and the ASU Center for Responsible Innovation. We have a number of co-organizers who have helped us sort of broadcast the series and often participate. And so we want to thank them for their help over the year. And the mission of the seminar series has been to provide opportunities for the STIR community to learn, connect, and grow. And the STIR community is very international. So, that's part of the reason why we record these, is because not everyone is able to make the times at which we have them. And of course, it's the day before New Year's. Thanks everyone for who's come today, for showing up. It's really great to take this moment. And then just by way of reminder, the STIR methodology has three distinct components. There are many other components, such as pre and post interviews and informal interviews and whatnot, but we don't include those because they're fairly generic. But the specific ones to STIR are the decision protocol, the techniques and the ethos of the embedded humanist, and the midstream modulation analytical framework. And really the goal of this methodology is to collaboratively describe routine expert decisions in real time in order to then assess the capacities that scientific experts have to engage in reflexive socio-technical integration and more deliberate means of socio-technical integration. So, as I said, right, we want to understand expert capacities for integration. This is the primary focus of STIR as a method. However, STIR is also very good at exploring the scope for expanding these capacities. And so STIR does that both in a research capacity and also in a sort of interventive capacity, which then brings us to the final objective of STIR, which is a little bit of an interesting one, and that is to actually exercise, to collaboratively assist experts in broadening their capacities for integration. But the reason this is interesting, and the reason we have a star here, is that we have to only exercise these capacities in the context of objectives 1 and 2. So basically, we are prioritizing the research and knowledge generation function of STIR over the interventive action research aspects of STIR. Okay, and I take a hard line on this. So even to the point of saying, okay, don't intervene. When in doubt, don't intervene, right? And we have these rules of engagement where we take specific steps so that the embedded humanist minimizes her interventive role in terms of referring to her own authority, introducing information that wasn't there. And we wrap all that under this idea of STIR or STIR 1.0. But then we allow for people using STIR in a different way, that maybe they're going to say, we're going to exercise capacities also, and not subsume this under 1 and 2. Or maybe exercising the capacities is the main focus of using STIR. That's fine. We just then distinguish that and we call it STIR 2.0. So really, it's this question of how does the interventive aspect of STIR work? If it's in service of knowledge generation, you can call it STIR or STIR 1.0. If the primary or an equal objective is to disrupt and to change, then this is something that we refer to as STIR 2.0. So there have been many studies around the world on 4 different continents, and many of these have been published. And today we have the honor of welcoming Rob Pronk, who Rob and I have met together and worked together over the years. And Rob has worked with Steven Flipsa, one of the co-organizers, I think, or certainly one of the presenters of the seminar series. And Rob has done an extremely interesting study. It's very unique in a number of different ways. One way is that, as I think you'll see, there's much more of an emphasis on STIR 2.0. And another way is just the analysis, the modes of analysis of the modulations and the interactions, both using a quantitative approach that's very sophisticated, as well as having a communication theory background. And then finally, it's I think Rob is opening up an area that's not typically looked at in STIR studies. We have the modulation sequences, but what happens in between those modulation sequences? This is sort of beyond the ability of the midstream modulation framework to explain, and Rob is really sort of pushing into those. So really, really happy to have Rob presenting. And Rob is, he's an engineer, he's a social scientist, he's an academic, he's a musician, he's a practitioner. He's really got a lot of tools in his toolbox. And just want to thank you for showing up today and bringing your stuff, and welcome you. And we're going to give you the floor.
Wow. First off, thanks so much for the lovely introduction of, I think, an amazing field, Eric, as well as the kind introduction of little old me. I appreciate it. And before we started rolling, for everybody joining us live, welcome everybody in online as well. Well, it's all online, but you know what I mean, in the session and outside the session. It's a little bit overwhelming for me, or even weird, to be here as a speaker, as I feel that I'm not a scientist in my everyday life. I am a consultant, and I have to say that being introduced to STIR in my studies and mystery modulation has changed the way I interact with clients, students completely. But I don't write much about it. Nonetheless, I'm really, really honored and excited to talk about what I put on paper about it, and I hope it makes sense to a large extent. And where it doesn't, I hope we can have interesting discussions, or find ways forward, moving away from what I put on paper. I think that's the cool thing about science. So yeah, let's just dig in. And by all means, if there's a question at any point, if anything I say is not clear, feel free to interrupt. I only enjoy that, so definitely no problem. So I have prepared a couple slides, not too many. Maybe it's nice to talk a little bit about myself, so you have a little bit of context who was talking today. Well, I think Eric captured it pretty well, but my name is Rob. For my friends, I consider you my friend. I have a background in science communication and biomedical engineering, and a more, let's say, hardcore engineering, bachelor's in mechanical engineering. And I started 2 companies. One is called Innovi Consulting, in which I actually, I see that STIR works every day. I make health technology analysis for research projects and startups, sometimes spin-offs also, in the field of surgical equipment and so forth. But the capacity, I think, I'm speaking of more now today, is the communication engineers, which is a training platform in the field of communication by engineers and for engineers. I thought that was lacking. I thought everybody who trains engineers is not really an engineer in the field of communication, and there was a gap to be bridged. That's what I'm trying to do. And much like Eric, I have a big passion for music. So music was my, started off as a hobby and became my job, and it still is. for, let's say, 60-70% of my time. So I produce music for artists, and yeah, I write songs and I play on records. That's what paid my tuition actually when I was still in college. So that's a little bit about me. Let's move into the program. So I have a kind of a simple program, loosely, based around the paper, the manuscript that you have all received. Perhaps you were able to scan through it. If not, that's no big problem. I think the story is simple enough to catch on. Um, so the context of this study is important to understand. It was a master thesis project back starting in 2016. Then this study was based on a communications framework by Robert Craig, which we will discuss more thoroughly later on. And of course, this study had a particular case. In my situation, I was involved with a group of four biomedical engineers working on a surgical tooltip. Okay, and I'll show you some more about it and all the stress and and that came was a part of this situation, but it was a very insightful time. Then, as Eric highlighted, I would like to show you some of the methodology for which I built a database structure that enabled us to analyze communication characteristics in a way that wasn't done before, I guess, and at least gave us some flexibility in comparing and identifying things that are important to understand. This all resulted in a premature but setup of a communication model, which we can look at, and I have some discussions and recommendations to make at the end, hopefully together with you, and we have a nice integrative last section of our evening, I would say, but your morning for most of you, yeah, in the States. Okay, I will go in and out my slides here. I'm not going to use them all the time, but it gives a little bit of a structure. So first, the background. His name was mentioned as well, Stephen Flipse. He's a assistant professor at the TU Delft, Faculty of Applied Sciences, and he was one of my teachers actually in the period where I had to. I was touring all the time and playing, but I also wanted to graduate. And he said, why don't we just talk and I'll introduce you to some of the work I've been doing. And it just resonated with me, the things he did in his dissertation. And we started brainstorming and kind of forming a scientific agenda, very loosely still. And at a certain point in 2016, and I saw your name, Eric, a couple of times, of course, in publications by then. Stephen thought it would be a good idea to go to the steer community get together. That's not the right word, but you know what I mean. In Cardiff that year, so in Wales, which was a beautiful setting, and I got to meet you, Eric, for the first time, and it was very insightful to hear you speak about midstream modulation in particular for me. But just stir as let's say, an umbrella term and a way of looking at socio-technical integration, which is still today very much overlooked with, I think, detrimental results or lack of results in engineering and exact natural sciences in particular. So Eric gave me a crash course on what it is to be an embedded humanist, right? We did practice sessions with, I think there was another master student, there was a PhD candidate, there was myself, and I believe another student. And just by practicing, two things happen. You get familiar with the role that you can or cannot play, which is kind of difficult to theorize. I find, reading about it is one thing, but I think by doing it, you can really almost physically feel the boundaries, or that's a good thing, boundaries as well, but you can really feel them instead of reading about them. And it also allows you to link, let's say, the theoretical part to your own character and your own preferences, your own ways of communicating. This is just my idea of, I think, effective communication in business or in projects starts with authenticity. So if you can authentically link, who you are to the theory, I think you'll be that much more successful and quicker on your feet in situations where you have to think really quickly. Do I have to be quiet now, or do I have to speak? And how do I speak when I do? Okay, so that was a really, really useful seminar and workshop. After that, we started drafting a set of research questions, and those are the following. So first of all, we just wanted to know what was in the black box, the communication black box of mystery modulation interactions, because Stephen and I had no real idea. We have all these modulations, right? These changes in governance, as you wrote down, Eric. But how, from an interaction with some embedded humanist, we know that. How does it work? Can we characterize that? And if we can we, model it with the goal? That was my goal. I love, giving training. I love teaching. Can we teach that to other people in a systematic way, so that and we can discuss it at the end. Even it could be a part of a curriculum in engineering education, right? Because I believe that even if you are a consultant, if you are able to deploy mystery modulation, you'll be a better listener, and you get more skilled in asking the right questions to the right person. But that was in the back of my mind. First of all, I wanted to graduate, so was kind of all condensed in this second research question or aim. And on third place, we had not seen a MM study conducted in the field of medical engineering, which is my technical background, and I thought it would be interesting to see if we can validate the findings of other studies in a medtech context. All right. So after that, we were looking for a communication framework. And this is a little bit of an abstract story why this became important to me personally, but I was looking for the right language to use when you actually do find things that you need to characterize, right? What is the language that you then use? Similar to when you have Cartesian coordinates in that calculus, and we're used to working with those things. We use X and Y, and it works really well. But sometimes it's better to switch to polar coordinates, right? Or you have different coordinate transformations that you can establish for your problem to look as elegant and simple as possible. So we were looking for a framework that would enable us to do that. Can we find an elegant way to talk about and to describe what we are going to see? So we had a couple of requirements, right? So it had to be systematically. We need to be able to categorize the nature of the communication. It needed to be applicable to interpersonal and direct communication, opposed to, for instance, mass communication, right? This more like it's not so much a transaction, but more of a broadcast type of communication where there's much written about. We did not want to resort to domain-specific models just yet. Also because there wasn't, I, with my humble background and minimum of resources and skill set, also at the time, wasn't able to find those models that were fitting. And last but not least, we wanted something that was easily well known by others in the community, right? You can find maybe some more exotic frameworks, but what will that do if they are not so familiar with the community that you're trying to cater to? Will that take power away from what you are trying to do? Okay, so this is what we started with, and that ended with let's say a fight with what it eventually came. That's the model, meta model by Robert Craig from 1999. But we also seriously considered discourse analysis. But with discourse analysis, why we excluded that at the very end is because of DA is more about how language enacts social cultural perspectives and identities that are relevant and that are telling for a time. The way I said just now, 100 years ago, somebody wouldn't have done that, for instance. So that wasn't what we were looking for. We wanted to describe the characteristics and the nature of communication, not so much how it enacts in a social cultural perspective. Also, we wanted to see how and if communication changes over time. And here comes that idea of an engineer again, that, if communication is dynamic doesn't mean anything else than changing over time, right? There must be a derivative, and I wanted to make derivatives because they are very telling about the system that we are looking at. Could we do that? Not with DA so much, in our opinion, back then. So that was excluded. I thought it was interesting to highlight that because discourse analysis is, I think, in our field, something that you would resort to in a situation like this. So that's why we did not do that. We ended up with, as I mentioned before, a meta model by Robert T. Craig. It's an essay he wrote called Communication Theory as a Field. And I thought the idea behind the essay was, I think, I don't want to give a value term to it, but I thought it was a really good idea of him saying, well, these are 7 most recognized communication theories, and scholars are much, stuck in their pillars sometimes and fighting each other over what the best way is to look at communication theory or communication. And he said, well, why not leave them all be and see how actually where the overlaps are, how we can use all of them actually to solve problems and answer questions about communication and communication theory. And I think without it being a grand unified theory, because that's not what it is, but just having them coexist, these 7 pillars of communication theory, I thought that was the most powerful framework that we could find then, without excluding, without excluding anything, perhaps, and as a basis to at least, use to describe what we are doing. This is a print of that meta model that you can find in the paper as well. But this was literally the matrix, the framework of what would become my master thesis. So I got familiar with these 7 traditions. Those are the columns, and how they, and of course a little bit more elaborately than what you see in this matrix, but how they actually theorize communication, what the the boundaries were. So we call them problems here, and what type of vocabulary is fitting for each of the traditions. And then so that was the framework. Basically, we had to make that kind of clear. Now, then we skip to a more practical side of it. So what's going to be the background, the canvas of this story that we are going to trying to tell? And this is, I think, the most fun part for me as a student. I was looking for a nice research group or a startup company affiliated perhaps with TU Delft, because that's close to home, where I could just embed myself for a number of weeks and do my study. And I got in touch with another assistant professor called Tim Horeman. He is, yeah, I think an exceptional biomedical engineer with a lot of IP, a lot of PhD candidates that he's has under his wing, and he's very entrepreneurial. And he was found himself in a situation. So I actually sent him an email and I called him. He's like, well, I want you to solve this issue for me. I got people collaborating. So we have company A, B, and C. I anonymized them for the study. With company A, I have 2 engineers, one of which is me. He said that. And then company B from Iceland with 1 engineer, and company C in the Netherlands, but the engineer is American. There's IP and we need to found this company, but there's so many communication issues. So it was in a cool way, right? He was so forward and enthusiastic about me being a consultant solving an issue for him. And I had to kind of like manage the expectations, like, oh, wait a minute. I want to conduct this study. And if the result is that some issues are resolved, that's perfect. But I'm not necessarily there to intervene. I'm here to watch, listen, learn, probe, and nudge, you know? So it started off, I was kind of pushed into STIR 2, you know, early on by the enthusiasm of my client instead of, you know, my research canvas. And it all turned out to be for the better because it was very inspirational. But I thought it was funny that I was thrown into like the fire like that in the STIR 2 fire without having much choice there. So it's very problematic, and I think most of us here know about research projects. There's funding coming in. There's a technology readiness level that is quite high in these type of projects. I'll show you some of the issues that we're working on. But if the team is not working together right in the right way, then yeah, you're just burning money. You're making the wrong research decisions. Timelines get you know, are not respected, with the result that that technology is shelved. This happens with medical technology very, very often. And just as a little bit of background of the case study, right? We were working in the field of laparoscopy. So that means keyhole surgery. Instead of making large incisions in the abdomen, we make like, well, what is it? 10 to 20 millimeter incisions. And we can insert medical tools. You see on the left-hand side, there's a light source actually inserted. There's a camera inserted, and these tooltips that you see on the right-hand side. The tooltip that you see here is actually the tooltip of the team. And it's interesting because there's no hinges. Hinges are very, you know, they become dirty very quickly with human tissue when you use them, hard to clean, high risk for infections and so on. Try to not make it too technical, but hinges we don't like as medical engineers inside a body very much. So we try to avoid them. And this is the tip, actually. It's built like a spring. It's called a compliant grasper for that reason. There's no hinges, and you can detach this really well and easily and clean it and sterilize it. There were some technical issues still. There were financial issues that we will talk about later, but this is kind of the background. 3 research groups, early startups working towards founding a company. It's intercultural, it's international. People are not in the same location. So it's a complex background that I wanted to share with you. So the study was started. I had in mind to be done in maybe 6 weeks or 8. Became a little longer because of the issues also presented, also because of my own work as a musician, but definitely also you know, the availability of people and the readiness for them to open up to an embedded humanist. Yeah, to just roll with the punches and see when I was able to do some work and when it wasn't a good time. So I ended up doing 5 and for some 8 individual sessions with all four of the engineers. And I used the decision protocol. Yours, Eric, as my the cross on my piece of paper that I started with every session. I must say, after a while, I didn't make the cross on the paper anymore. I just had it here, of course, and I was able to just move between the decision-making stages fluently because it became my second nature, right? If you do this often enough, you don't have to really write it down. And in fact, writing things down, we'll maybe discuss that when we talk about embedded humanist training. It's actually potentially slowing down the conversation. And what you actually want to establish is flow of the technical expert. I kind of try to make them flow, and I just need to catch up and stay with them, rather than me writing things down and them being quiet. I just want them to keep flowing, because I noticed that maybe there's some science to conduct about that in the future, but I noticed that it's way more effective when people don't feel hampered in what they want to just talk about.
Rob,
Okay,
you said, Robin, you said we could interrupt you, right?
Yeah, definitely, please.
Cool. Yeah, I have one question. Because it's really an interesting background that you say there were these three companies in different countries working together, with three startups trying to form a company. And I was wondering what embeddedness means in that context. So was all interaction between these three startups taking place online anyways? So when you were embedded, that means you joined their online conversations, or were you physically in one of the companies? I know, I can't really make sense. I mean, just because I come from a background where I was physically present in a lab and I was just seeing their work, but this is just not feasible in this context, right? So I'm curious what embeddedness means.
Yeah. Great question. So it means all of the above. I definitely did a lot of meetings at the lab or office, because you don't need a clean room at this stage, or anything like that. So the Dutch companies were part of the TU Delft ecosystem, and they use resources that you, as a student of biomedical engineering, also use. So there's this minimal invasive, I hope I get the abbreviation right, but there's an acronym for minimal invasive technology, and there's a laboratory that they often worked at. So I would meet them there. And also, because they were part of the startup hub, Yes Delft, that is part of TU Delft. They had office space, they rented office space, and they would do some prototyping in there. So I would be there or at the lab with the Dutch entities. Now, with the Icelandic entity, it was a little bit more difficult. I did not go to Iceland, but there, the engineer that was from that company and representing the work, he used to be a master student as well at TU Delft in biomedical engineering. So he really just transitioned back home in the period that I was doing my master's thesis. So I did have physical meetings with him, as well as online meetings where he would be at the office in Iceland. Does that clear up the embeddedness? Yeah, great question. So I was embedded in, I think, in a physical sense and practical sense, as well as in a more esoterical, or you can even call it spiritual sense, perhaps. In conversation and in the thought process, more so of the engineer. Yeah. So this whole study ended up taking up 7 months, and I was able to code audio for a couple of these, what we end up calling now in this draft that you all have received, we call them communication lenses, right? We use the 7 pillars of communication theory as a lens through which we can observe, categorize, and characterize communication. I also coded for something that I saw along the way. I wasn't planning on doing this, but I started to notice that, you know, when you speak to four individuals about their role and their perspective on forming a startup, you see these recurring topics and issues, right? And then I noticed, like, wow, participant 1 has a completely different idea about this topic compared to participant 4. That is interesting, and that's biting them in the butt. You know, that's keeping them behind in the process. So that allowed me to, kind of do some cross-referencing, I would say, and identify these topics and issues, code for them, and see how I would address these with all the individuals. Okay. And then last, of course, but not least, in order to validate the mystery modulation, we needed it to code for modulations, you know, these changes in governance. We coded for the 3 levels, you know, so the defector, reflexive, and deliberate. And it ended up being over 640 segments, or 640 individual segments of communication. And these segments were between 30 seconds and a minute and a half. So what we would do, and there's examples in the paper, what we would do is, or I would do, is ask a question. How are things going with the attachment of the tip to the shaft, the technical, let's say with something technical. I hear a sigh, or somebody's rubbing their face, or, you know, and then a story would come about. And the moment I was able to see the lens through which I was able to characterize this piece of communication the best, I would code it with, for instance, could be anything, the critical tradition, or the social psychological tradition, whatever fitted the best. And I was able to detect an issue. So the issue was maybe the tool tip to shaft attachment, right? And I would code that, and if there was a modulation in place, I would code for that as well. In order to do this in a kind of a way that is easy to digest for myself, and maybe for future researchers, I resorted to using Excel. I didn't know much about Excel. I used to, I hardly use it as an engineer, but I thought it would be fitting. Everybody has Excel or has access to it. So I thought if you could do it in Excel, then others can reproduce it quite easily. And I got some training, because the things I wanted to do, I wrote them out on paper, much as I always do with a design when I build stuff. But I also knew, I think you could do this with Excel. I just don't have the skills. And I happen to have my closest friend, my friend for over 30 years. We grew up together, and he's an economist, and he works in finance. He is a CFO of a company at the moment. And he lives for this, right? So I was able to share my sketches of the machine I was trying to build. And he's like, oh, no problem. And he really helped me out in, I think, 2 hours time or less, and it was done. And I think I was the factor slowing us down, because I think he had it done in 15 minutes. And so I was able, he was able to help me with that, as I was able to help him with his calculus back in the day. So that was really, really cool. Before we go to the model, I thought, what can I show you that is not already in the paper? And that is actually the Excel. So I thought it would be fun maybe to really guide you through it and show you how I did this, right? So let me share this screen now. This is the first page of my data set, the raw data set. Everybody can see this and see this moving as well. So these are lines. Let me zoom in on one, where you see a couple of columns. So the participant, P1 to 4, You see which session it is. So with some I did 5, some I did 8. If I coded for a piece of communication, I always included the starting time of that segment. So if you would go back to the audio, you would be, would be easy to find. Then there was a code for the communication lens, the communication tradition most fitting to the segment of communication that we just witnessed. And if there was any there, I coded for the issue or issue or topic, as it is referred to in the latest draft, I believe, of the subject going on. So, and then I would, of course, and this is the most work, I would describe this piece of communication. So, well, let's start just randomly picking one. Let's pick line 14. So this was with participant 1, the second session, the date. 2 minutes in, there was something, an interaction that was coded rhetorical, in the rhetorical tradition. So me probing and nudging probably. And I said, a new cycle of information acquisition by EH, that's me, hence strategic communication. P1 has been working on a connection between nitinol, grasper, so nitinol is a metal, and the stainless steel housing. Oh, that's a funny coincidence because we were just talking about that. He elaborates on P4's attempt to weld. You can weld these two things together, which is not a good idea, I can tell you. Different melting temperatures of the materials make welding theoretically impossible. P4 believes otherwise. Another idea of P4 is to add aluminum, or aluminium as you say in Europe, layer at the connection. P1 does not believe in the mechanics nor in certification, because the background of all this is that medical equipment needs to be certified before usage. So, this is all makes medical engineering that more complicated. That shows P1's awareness for medical safety. P1 asked P4 to make reports to support his ideas, right? So if one believes this is possible and the other not, let's just show evidence. So this is typical for one line of communication, and I did this, over 640 times. So this is what it started with.
And Rob, can I just ask, that's an interesting segment. There's a lot in it. Do you have a sense of how long that segment was? Was it a 2-minute long segment? Longer, shorter?
So the longest ones in my recollection were 1.5 minutes. Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
It could have been 2 minutes, but no longer than that. I would try to not do that. Of course, for let's say the resolution of the data set, right? If I had too long interactions, that would take away the resolution. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is what it looks like. And this is just a raw data entry file, which doesn't have any filtering. Now on the next page, it's actually the same data set, but then with filters up top. So I could filter the participant that I'm looking at, or the session I would look at. So you see here only session 7 was included, but we can undo that. We can look at the data per date, start time, which is not really relevant to do that. But more importantly, you could select filter on the communication lens used, as well as the issue being observed. Okay. And I forgot to mention actually that part of the column code was not only the 7 communication traditions, it also was the level of modulations, if a modulation was found. Okay, and now for a particular segment, if you wanted to code for the communication lens, the appropriate lens, let's say cybernetics, but there was a modulation as well, I would copy and paste the line so I could code them twice. So for the communication tradition as well as the modulation. I think that's important to mention as well. really understand how I built this data set. Now these issues, in the beginning, there's many, right? And some are not reoccurring and they don't really show to be an issue. We ended up with, I think, a list of 8 of them, which you can see here. And they're technical, like a balloon trocar. Trocar is, let's say, the mounting of a laparoscopic device on a cavity in the abdominal skin. But there's also the issue of finance, which is, I can show you. The issue of finance was mostly discussed with participant 2. Participant 2 is a medical engineer, but responsible for the finance more so, and not so much about the design. The issue finance was really, one of the, let's say, the catalysts of the tension in the team, as it often is. There's a limited resources, financial resources, and when money would come in from subsidy funding or startup venture capital, whatever they would be able to collect, P2 was kind of tasked with making a budget, while other team members would grab and hold on to that money as you would throw a piece of meat, among a group of lions. They were all grabbing on the meat, on the money, and he had real trouble with that. And how he was able to modulate and move and maneuver in that landscape, that is really nice to see that in this data set, where he started like, well, if I just tell everybody this is the money coming in and asking them what to do, it's gonna be a fight. So, with some probing and nudging, he came up with the idea of being more, let's say, proactive, spending more time in asking people individually what they want and not in a group conversation. Tell them about restrictions and absolute no's individually instead of in groups. So he would diffuse the situation. Then when it was time for a group meeting, everybody was already primed with the constraints that the financial director to be gave. And that really smoothed out the communication in the group. So that's one of the modulations that come top of mind surrounding finance. Now, looking at knowledge sharing, there was just also because of proximity or lack of proximity of group members, and the perception of a more novice member that he wasn't able to speak up, there was a technical issue that is super important, and I won't go into it because it doesn't matter, but believe me when I say it makes the design so much more effective. He wasn't sharing his ideas, and I know because of my background that if he would, at least talk about it, I think it would be really better for the design. So I didn't tell him you need to talk about it, but I tried to figure out why he's not talking about it. And eventually, also with the more senior member, probing and nudging again, like, hey, do you think you guys share enough ideas still? Do you get to do that? And it ended up, being a technical added module. A module was added to the technology because of people eventually becoming aware of that they're not talking enough about the technology, and it really reflected on the design. So that's really nice to see. And so on and so on. I think I'm going to refer to the paper if you want to know more about these 8 topics, but I just wanted to highlight 2 or 3 and show you all how they come about and why they are topics in the first place.
Rob, this is really great. I'm just interrupting because you said that we could.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's super fascinating. And I just want to let you know that we've got about just over 30 minutes.
All right.
So you might want to take us, like even if you're plunging us into the deep end, we can handle it. So
All right, I will do that. So, okay. So now, and this is just, ICT, blah, blah, blah. You make a pivot table and you select what you want to see in your pivot table, right? So here, this is the 8th session of P1, and I have the codes on the left-hand side, and I want to see them over time. So in this 8th session of P1, I want to just see whatever I coded, right? And yeah, then you can make visualizations of that as well, which with this density, of course, is not going to look as smooth, but it's insightful to see how and if communication changes within the session, and also how traditions, where you see traditions over time. So, I mean, over 7 months of time. And if they changes between, if it differs between participant, right? So you can make all these figures, which I have, and they look as you can see in the paper. Now, to throw you in the deep end, what did I do to summarize, going to kind of the result part of what I've done, is to actually look at all these interactions and see if I could see some regularities or irregularities. And I saw a couple funny things, and I, then try to put them in a model. So let's just discuss that real quickly and see what we can find. First of all, I identified 3 stages in communication that I wasn't aware of when I started the study. So first of all, me as an embedded humanist, I was really trying to identify issues. What is the problem? What is the challenge? What is the opportunity? That was my primary focus. Now, this is not as straightforward, because sometimes or oftentimes you won't get a straightforward answer, or people think they give a really deep answer and it isn't deep. So you need to, with rhetoric and semiotics, a lot of drawing and a lot of, visually mediated communication, come to the core of the matter. What is really going on? And I noticed this was an interaction, a loop between me and the participants. You also see in this stage, the first stage, that it's the phenomenological tradition is also highlighted, which is I think a measure for informal and sincere communication between people, and it is a measure of, let's say, a quality of the relationship between the embedded humanist and the participant. If you have a lot of communication that is characterized by this tradition, that means people are at ease with each other. You talk about what you did on the weekends, for instance, or oh man, I felt like that as well after I did such and such. It's funny that with participant 4, and it's also reported in the paper, there was a immediate decline actually in this, seeing this tradition, when he felt betrayed by his teammates. And because I was talking to everybody, I have a feeling, this is my assumption, he did not know whether he could trust me or that I was, agreeing with the rest of his teammates, right? And you see that the communication also changed. Now, in the second stage, that is really up to me, using probing and nudging again to develop a modulation. And this is also, I think, an interesting point in seeing STIR 1 versus STIR 2. So because of, I think, my background with medical engineering, I think I was prone to and excited also to at least open people up to some ideas, even if it was only because I had the ability to talk to everybody and they did not talk to one another often enough, right? One tradition that also then was playing more and more a part is the critical tradition, where there was a discursive reflection going on, fed by me, but definitely the reflection was done by the participant. And from that, critical reflection on their own, being or decision making, or how they fit in the team, it could be anything work related, I was able to see a change, sometimes de facto, in people seeing that knowledge sharing. Oh my God, this is an issue, which if I would have asked him a week before that, they would say like, no, everything is fine. Up into very deliberate moves where people change the design of their medical device. So, and reflexivity in between all that. Which is then the third stage of me assessing where and to what extent a modulation would take place. Interesting enough, we talk about database structure, but I noticed that I was building a database myself. I was being a database because I was talking to everybody, and that's what you see below. There were parallel trajectories in this study, right? On the left-hand side below, which is in a way very cybernetic way of framing communication, because it was able to send, receive, store, redistribute information, much like as a cybernetic network in a computer. So I thought it was interesting to notice, and that's why it's in the model. Also, I noticed that my relevant expertise was really important in this study, or at least the way I was doing embedded humanism work. So this is, again, I think closer to my personal style, and it comes easy to me to do it like that, because I know about the medical device directive, I know about CE certification, I know about the timelines, I have an idea about the cost structure of R&D processes in the medical technical realm. So that kept me away from what I would say benign questioning. I was able to get to it. And by that, that's a philosophical question. Am I then also steering too much or not? I wasn't telling people what to do, but I was placing the finger exactly where I knew I had to put it. And of course, there is just your experience as a human being. I think I took a lot, because it's just, they're not different than a band. If you have 4 guys in a tour bus, and I've been there, they're going to bicker. They're going to disagree about the set list. They're going to, this is the same. These are just, people, PhD level trained people bickering about the same type of things. And I was able to see that because of my own work experience in music. I never talked about music with them, but I knew for myself that if I would probe or nudge a certain way, that was, partially fed by my own personal experience as a human being. So that's the third box in the bottom right of the model. This all is feeding into the database, and I was able to then redistribute that in these 3 stages of the modulation.
So Rob, help
Yes.
us understand this fascinating system you've got. If we just focus on the 2 upper left boxes, re-identifying issue, redeveloping mod, these seem to be the closest to the data, the closest to the interactions, right? So if we could actually take a transcript that maybe lasted, a 30-minute stir session, session, and break it down, and you could say, here's where I'm asking a question, here's where the participant's responding, right? So help us, I think we got a good sense, or I got a good sense overall that, what's going on in re-identifying the issue. This is your attempt through the interactive conversation, through the structured dialogue, to identify what we call an opportunity. It could be a problem, a challenge, a task. But help us understand the blue circles, the arrows. We understand that there are these 7 different traditions, but there's a lot of information here. I feel like I'm not quite getting, maybe how, when you say a communication changes. So I know you just kind of walked us through an example. Maybe if you could use a different example, or come back to the same example and just
reiterate. Yeah, by all means. So I'm gonna go with one of in the top of my mind, because it's just easier to reproduce. Let's keep that knowledge transfer issue, right? So I noticed talking to the participants that, for instance, with the this was the one of those P3, the guy from the Icelandic part. He said, and what is shrugging? It's like, well, yeah, I have an idea for, it's called static balancing. So it's balancing out the spring force in the tooltip. It's mechanics. We can forget about it, but I have an idea. But who am I, man? I'm just new here and just want to do my work and not, basically bitch too much. That's what he said. I'm like, okay, not bitch too much. Well, do you feel that it would be considered bitching if you would bring it up? Because that's my sincere question. So here's me trying to so if I pause there, right? He's saying something. There's a social psychological lens that I could see that through. There's a shrug, there's discomfort there, and it's my rhetoric then to jump on it, basically say, what do you think it would be considered bitching if you would? Which is in a way also it's nudging him to talk about it, but it's also probing him to actually act about it. Act, is that a good sentence? But to act about it, to do something about it.
So how would that be represented by the blue arrows? Because it seems that there's one interaction of the EH asks P, and then P responds. So would that just be one question and response?
Right, basically, yes. And that would not be the end of it. So in practice, what you would notice is that my nudge sometimes would be unnoticed, right? So you would do several attempts and you get several reactions that weren't what I was looking for, what I wanted to establish.
But you're just representing one interact. So there might have been, 10 of these in the first 2 or minutes, but you're just pulling one of them out and coding that one.
Yeah. So these blue loops, they happen quite quickly. This could be, especially, engineers amongst themselves, they're very, they're not very prosaic. They don't talk that much most oftentimes, right? And so you kind of get these loops that are super quick, and they keep going until this issue is identified. Sometimes that I know how to, it's more for me so that it is for them. But I needed to give at least a sort of a framework for the experts to identify what is going on, and for myself. So sometimes I would misunderstand. So I would say, "Oh, do you mean this?" So it's a strategic question again from my end. Do you mean this? Oh, not quite. It's actually more like this. Here we go again. So these are the type of loops that you see in the model. Yeah.
So could the model, if we just look at the upper left hand, right, the one we've been talking about, is it possible to represent multiple loops with the same diagram? And is that what's going on with the different traditions?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's inside the loop and what's outside the loop, those are different T1 and T2, or?
Well, it depends. Yeah, good question. I think it depends on what issue you are looking for. So the biggest constraint here, so the constraints are the system boundaries, right? As an engineer, are with dotted red. So anything outside of the issue is outside of these communication loops, right? So also, if you would let's say we would digress into talking about the weather, I'm just saying something crazy now, that wouldn't be part necessarily of this loop. Also, this loop could go on over sessions, so it could start somewhere in the 40th minute of session 1, and then continue in the after 15 minutes in the next session. Yeah, and that's why coding the column for issue or topic was so important, because you can then trace where the conversation ended and restart it again and see how it actually developed over time.
Yeah, I'm also curious to understand more about the reassessment or assessment part, which is at the end. simply because it seems like, since it's part of this whole blue line, circle, whatever, it seems like it was always also part of a midstream modulation session or a steer session. So not something you did after the fact at home. While in my case, the assessment of the modulations were actually sometimes happening a year or two after I had done my steer study, because it took me so long to see actually effects of our interactions. And secondly, also because I needed to work through my data quite physically and process it and see it through different lenses and discuss it with different people to see if there was a modulation going on or not. How was that for you?
Yeah. So this was something that I discussed with Stephen at the time. Like preferably we would have gone, do a revisitation of this group, but the group ceased to exist. The startup never was founded. But even on an individual level, talk to people 6 months after and see what kind of, still relevant and alive from what was established in the sessions on a more, let's say, de facto or reflexive level, right? Because indeed, I agree that some of the modulations would take place, in your case, 2 years later. That's not surprising to me at all. In my case, though, even with the the deliberate level of modulations, well, I don't know what I did not detect, but what I was able to detect was within the running time of the study.
Yeah, within the running time of the study, but also always in the sessions, or could it also be?
Oh, like that. Right. Most of the times, yeah, I would, well, not all the deliberate things, because if somebody is going to say, is saying, man, I'm really going to incorporate this in my design, right? Mm-hmm. Then to me, that shows a level of being deliberate about it, but the actual design still has to be made, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a discrepancy there. But most of the sessions, most of the modulations on a lower level, I was able to detect in the session, because de facto, you kind of see the light bulb going on by somebody, and they will, sometimes if they don't verbalize it, I would ask them, what are you thinking right now? And the answer would be, yeah, I'm just thinking about my own perspective on this, and that I used to do A, B, and C, but now I need to switch it up given the fact that participant 4 feels this way. So there's reflexivity there, and you were able to detect that on the spot. Yeah. Does that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure if I wouldn't say I'm impressed. Yeah, maybe I'm impressed, or maybe I just see you a very different person or steerer, just because also these moments of reflexivity, it was really for me actually going out of the session to detect these things and see, for me, listening into the interviews or reading the transcripts was really important. But maybe it was also because I was doing it not in my mother tongue. I'm just impressed that you could actually see these things during the session, because it takes a lot of awareness and attentiveness. And I was probably also still so much focusing on just executing the method properly, so to say.
Yeah.
And
this is a fascinating topic, because I've discussed this individually with each of you. And Rob and I, several years ago, we had a conversation about the musicality,
right,
of detection, if you would say, because for me, when Rob talks about noticing, the person's, body language of their eyes, and earlier when he was saying, when you start doing a stir session, you can feel it, you can physically feel it. And so I think Rob, you and I have this sense where we can sort of detect, it sounds kind of crazy to say it, but we can detect a shift in the thinking or the the orientation within the participant that's evident in part through the discursive flow, but there's also non-discursive aspects. Right. And so, but at the same time, not everyone either has this or has developed this or attends to it. And so a totally different way to detect changes in somebody's thinking and action is just later on to go back and read transcripts. And a third way would be to sort of do participant observation, and you could do process tracing that way. But yeah, so I think it's a fascinating topic, and I just wanted to say that I share Rob's experience. I've sort of sensed things before, and it'd be nice to hear from others about that. But it's okay. So
Yeah.
one of dozens of topics we could open up. Let's shift to Cynthia, because I think she's got a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was really interested in the transitions between, the red dotted boxes, if you will.
Right.
Like as when could you give an example? And I think you might have been doing that when you were talking about detecting. So when you're transitioning out of an issue orientation towards, are you sensing that a modification or a modulation might be developing in the middle box, and then you're going on further to more formalize it in the third box? Or what are those,
Right.
those crossovers, those linkages?
Right. Yeah. Thanks. Great question. So the first box, that could be, it could be very quickly. It could be maybe 7 interactions, and then, I know there's an issue, especially when you work with 4 people. You can kind of mirror, you can bounce it off of the next person and see, oh yeah, it really sticks. Then moving into developing a modulation, I think the premise for me was, does it need modulation? Does it need changing? And that's a question I would ask sometimes, So what you going to do about it? Does it need action? What if you do nothing at all? Which is in the list of, detecting considerations, right? In your governance model, Eric. What if you do nothing at all? What would fill in the blank do? What would a competitor do? A profit. You can make it as crazy as you want. So that is more. And then if you detect the need that lives in the participant to change, or that I, from my own experience as an engineer, know, yeah, well, they're never going to make certification if they don't get this under control, then I would try to see, with them, there's a very collaborative loop, what needs to be changed. And sometimes is that simple as sparking awareness, because sometimes you see the issue before the participant does, in the example that I just gave, right? So it was an issue for the novice engineer, but the very well-versed, super experienced, award-winning engineer, he didn't see it because he was probably way too busy with 7 PhD candidates asking to hold their hands. And then this dude want to talk about static balancing. I don't have time for this. Well, I'm gonna try to, maybe you should talk to P3 about this. And which is funny, and I think I reported this in the manuscript as well. He wasn't too happy about this. So the very experienced engineer said, like, yo, I don't see that this is an issue. Why are we even talking about this? And later on, he sent me a text. I believe it was a text on WhatsApp saying, well, I thought about what you said. So this is, an example, maybe, Marijke, of how things could also go post-session. Thought about what you said. I wasn't on my best behavior. I was super busy and stressed out. Sorry for that. I thought about it. And I think it's good to open up a conversation with P3 about this. You see? So this is also how things could go. And this is all developing a mod and finding how many back and forths I can get out of a person in a, well-spirited manner. This is where that critical scope is used oftentimes, right? To have just back and forth on a meta level almost about the material, and see if from that overstanding, if somebody can see like, oh man, a realization, or oh man, they know how to relate themselves to the issue, or oh man, I know what to do, I know what to draw, I know what to calculate, I know how to act now.
But Rob, there was also something else interesting in the paper that you sent out, which we haven't really talked about so much, which is P4. And P4 actually being the one with whom you have less phenomenological communication over time. And I pointed this because I actually think it's quite unique that you communicated about issues across STIR participants, which of course was possible because they were all kind of working on the same thing. But I can also imagine that this created quite some stir, so to say, in the group, or that people were, I mean, just because also I think like one STIR participant in my case actually told me afterwards I would have been, that he would have been more comfortable with me talking with me, and it would have been more helpful for him to do STIR with me if I had not recorded it, just because he was so afraid I would in one way or another communicate with other people about what he would do, even though I had told him, you know, I'm not going to do this, but still he was afraid because it was very sensitive topics he was dealing with at the time. And so ultimately we only talked about this later on, or I think outside of the sessions, like when we also established more of a rapport over time. But the point is here, like I wonder to what extent also your interventions, I mean, because you shed light now on the, let's say, the positive impacts where you created deliberate and reflexive modulations, but was there also maybe a downside to this cross communication? And yeah, how do you think?
And also maybe to start with, did the participants know you were doing this, and did you have their permission to do it, or did you just decide to do it without checking with them?
No, both, yes. So especially I stressed what I was doing because in the beginning, you know, P1 was so happy with, oh, there's this engineer with communication knowledge and he's gonna like make my team work well together again. So I had to manage those expectations by being upfront about what it is that I'm actually doing. And so they knew and they gave permission. I also signed an NDA prior to the study that I wouldn't, outside of that group, just because I saw a lot of IP in the months. We did not really include in the NDA personal issues or personal conversation, but you know, I made sure that it was never a he said she said type of role that I would play. And I don't think anybody has even challenged me to do that. You know, like nobody was like, yeah, but what did P3 say? You know, not that I can recall at least. So that was all done pretty smoothly, I think. And the downsides, well, the downside is that P4 eventually clammed up. You know, he did clamp up. So all the informal, let's say, phenomenological interactions that we used to have, and mind you, this guy's an American dude from, you know, surfer type, talks a lot and often, and he clammed up to just, you know, the bare minimum. So I knew that there was a trust issue, not so much toward me directly, but by association. I was just not the guy to talk about, or in a like chill fashion with cuss words in between. He wasn't doing that anymore because I think he knew, or he thought that, well, you know, the whole world is against me, and if P1, 2, and 3 turn their backs on me, why is this dude still want to talk to me, and why is he still going to be, you know, give me a fair chance of saying what I need to say? So, and I feel that immediately. So I tried to just, I did not address that particular part with him, but just in my communication, really ask him the questions that I knew that would show a genuine interest, you know, instead of me also clamping up or taking sides. I would always still ask, so how do you want to weld this thing then? Show me. What's going to happen with the heat profile? You know, nitinol and stainless steel melt at different temperatures. How do you see it, man? Without judgment, you know, really interested, because I'm an engineer. I want to know how you do that. Maybe I can apply it in my own work someday. So, you know, I try to shift towards that and really show genuine interest, which is not, there's not a facade. It's not an act. That is just something that I am genuinely interested. So it was easy to show, and we were able to do the sessions. You know, he could have said, dude, we have 3 sessions to go. I don't want to talk to you anymore. But that did not happen. So that's, I think, a positive. I just noticed that, you know, he was more, aware, and I could sense fear and reservation. So
So
that's a downside, maybe. Yeah.
I just in the interest of time, I just wanted to get a couple, three questions on the table, and then maybe Cynthia, Marika, Bonnie can get additional ones, and then Rob can choose what he responds to.
Yeah.
I'm still fascinated by the notation and trying to understand it. And so we talked about the loops, and it seems like, you know, one full loop can represent one exchange or multiple exchanges. And then so maybe it's more helpful to then look to the positioning of the different communication traditions. Does each time you list one of these, does that correspond to an event in time? So that's, you know, so that's one question I have. Another question I have is the phrase that you've used a lot, nudging, probing and nudging. It's interesting because, you know, again, I'm kind of maybe, you know, overly obsessed with this, but I tend to use the word probing for STIR 1.0 and nudging for STIR 2.0.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. And there were some examples that you gave where you practice what, you know, what we could call self-restraint, normative or epistemic restraint. I didn't, right? So you were definitely in that case practicing STIR as opposed to STIR 2.0. So just understanding more like what were the roles and the rules you were following and not, right? It'd be nice to understand more of that. And then finally, oh gosh, what was it? Oh yeah, your choice early on to stop using the worksheet to actually,
Right.
so that you're not writing things out. We don't have to get into it, but I'll just make the comment that it seems to be that there is a lot of value in having two or more people who are doing this STIR exercise all seeing the same graphic representation evolving over time. And so you've talked a little bit about what was gained, you know, in terms of facility and speed, by you know, jettisoning that. But it would be curious to sort of assess that more robustly and say, okay, but are there things that are lost in terms of stimulating modulations and whatnot? So those are just three topics. You know, feel free to ignore them all or tackle one or more, but also maybe we can give an opportunity for Cynthia, Marika, Bonnie, if they want to put anything else on the table, and then Rob can conclude how he wishes to. So Bonnie writes, she's interested in your thoughts, Rob, about the impact of individual characteristics and collaboration readiness in the quality of engagement.
Whoa. Yeah. Wow. Let's start with Bonnie's question. Well, I'm going to try to, because it's a tough one for me to answer, to be honest. The impact of individual characteristics / collaboration readiness. Well, this is interesting because, and I had this on my own topic of discussions in my slides where we don't get to that, but in my target audience was maybe a little bit different than what I saw in literature, meaning that so biomedical engineers, that it's a very young field. It is per definition multidisciplinary, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's mathematicians who are, you know, my teachers. I have medical doctors. Most of them are mechanical engineers or medical physicists, which is, they're all come from different realms, and in their academic upbringing, they had to collaborate a lot already with adjacent fields to get where they are. So I found that, you know, they are in you know, their readiness level. I don't know if I made a big change in that I have big impact on that, because the culture is already that it is very much ready to collaborate. You have to in order to survive. There are engineers solely focusing, for instance, on certification of medical equipment. So you can be the hotshot designer and good at, you know, forces and all that, but you're gonna need that other person to make it work. And it's kind of ingrained in the way they work. I noticed, you know, as a practitioner, scholar, novice in that field. So I did not see impact, and perhaps also answering it and thinking out loud, maybe I'm biased. So maybe I'm not able to detect it. Could also be the case because I'm part of the culture. It's not a satisfying answer, Bonnie. Sorry, but I think
No, it's fine. I was also curious, did you do much preparation prior to the first session, or how much stage setting you did?
yeah. So it started all with the Cardiff sessions with Eric, and then having a couple get-togethers with Stephen. And prior to this study, I did a pilot study actually with a fellow student of what did she study? Let's say it's industrial design with the emphasis on medical technology. And just a, super cool girl. And I found her through the internet, just T-Delft girl doing all these cool stuff. Is it cool if I just, walk with you when you design and ask you questions? And I ended up actually being around her for months, I think two months or so. So that was my pilot study. I did not report on that because it wasn't interesting enough maybe, but it gave me so much prep in how to conduct these sessions, and also doing it by myself without Stephen or Eric being able to assist. Give you a lot of, you have to really, trust on your own instincts and your own knowledge to get it done. And then prior to each session within this particular study, I would just do a little bit of sometimes reading or sometimes just reiterating in my head what's actually going on, who am I going to talk to, what are their perspectives on the matter. Okay, boom, let's do this. So, that those session preps become shorter and shorter because you feel so comfortable doing it. Yeah.
Great study. Thank you for sharing it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Very rich.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Rob. We're technically out of time, so I want to close it, but then I'll invite those on the call if we want to just keep chatting, we can. So with that, thanks so much, Rob, for a truly fascinating study, for plunging us into the deep end, for setting it up so nicely. I feel like there are so many topics we should do a second session just to identify the topics and then discuss them. But you're sort of coming in orthogonally to a lot of the other studies, and it can really disrupt productively a bunch of the ways that we think. But we'll talk more about it offline. But again, thanks everyone for participating. Thanks again to our speaker today and all 12 of our speakers over the last year. Thanks for the co-organizers. Thanks so much for Cynthia and Marika for your untiring work and keeping this going, and for Lyric behind the scenes for developing flyers, and for the STIR community worldwide, showing up. So happy New Year, everybody, and